Welcome to my arena. Let's have a sesh on extension strategies. So extension strategies, they are a part of the product life cycle. So watch that video before you watch this. So the product life cycle, you're remembering the research and development, introduction, growth, maturity and decline stage, and the fact that the sales over time will go through this shape here. Extension strategies usually happen in the maturity stage of the product life cycle. And so an extension strategy is a method for a business to increase sales when in a saturated market, a market that's no longer growing. And you're ideally going to do an extension strategy in the maturity stage. It's also possible you could do it in the decline stage, but it's more ideal and more likely to be effective if you do it in the maturity stage. The advantages, so why you would do an extension strategy. So you're doing it to increase your sales and therefore increase your revenue and hopefully increase your profits. The cons of doing an extension strategy, well, it's going to cost a lot to likely do one of these things that I'll get to in a minute. So high cost of doing the extension strategy, whatever the extension strategy is. And also, you could think, well, it may or may not be effective. And particularly if it's not effective and it doesn't actually increase your sales, well, there could be an opportunity cost because you could have spent that cash that you spent on the extension strategy, you could have spent it on something else. For example, you could have spent it on research and development for a product for the future. Because the hope is you want to make it a question mark of the future, and then it will move through the Boston Matrix, become a star, and then hopefully become a cash cow. And that's what you want, because you might be thinking, well, maybe it's not worth doing an extension strategy on this particular product, and we have a product portfolio, so we have other products, and we could instead not bother with the extension strategy and spend that cash on something else. But that's something you could put in the judgment of your 9 or 12 markers where this may likely feature. Next, let's look at the types of extension strategies that you could do. So a useful device to remember extension strategies is SPAM. Let's go through it. So SPAM, the first bit of it is segments, because a way of increasing your sales is you could target and position yourself in a new segment. And if you remember my segmentation video, I'm thinking LID, location, income, demographics. You're trying to target a new location. It could be a new town, for example, a new city. It could be income. It could be that you're looking for a premium range or a value range, and that could increase your sales and hopefully your revenue. Also, you could be thinking about targeting your existing product towards a new demographic. So that could be a different age group or a different sex, for example. A good one that I like here is man bags. I've got a man bag. Handbags. Handbags was a seriously saturated market. And then the handbag producers thought, well, why don't we target a different segment? And that segment was in demographics, it was a different sex, hence the man bag. Love my man bag. Everyone always takes the mick out of me about it. Let's move on to the next one. Price. So to reduce your price to increase your sales. And if you reduce your price, it's likely that you are going to increase those sales and possibly increase the revenue. You need to think about here is that this does closely relate to segments, because by reducing your price, you might be opening up to a new segment, a lower level of income segment. So there's a chance that people that previously could not afford the good can now afford the good, and therefore they will purchase the good. Because if you reduce the price, you increase the demand. That's the law of demand. So we've seen this a bit in the newspaper markets over the last decade, where newspapers, for a variety of reasons, mostly technology, have been reducing their prices. And that's allowed them to maintain themselves in the maturity or arguably the decline stage of the product life cycle. You could also go one step further. It's possible that you could reduce your price to such an extent that it's actually below the cost of production and therefore it's a loss leader. But I'd suggest that you do this in combination with another extension strategy. A, advertising. So you could run a promotional campaign to increase awareness of your product or remind your existing customers that you still exist, and hopefully that will increase your sales and therefore increase your revenue. It might also be that you're actually doing some sort of rebranding or repackaging. Often you could do them in combination, and that if you're doing a rebranding and repackaging of your product, for example seen with Iron Brew, well then you might need to do an advertising campaign because you're trying to change perception of your good to hopefully increase sales. So that's an example. And again, I'm emphasizing this combinations of extension strategies. M's a massive one. So markets, and not domestic markets, not just moving to another town or another city. I'm talking about international markets. So moving to a new geography, a new area. And if you enter to a new international markets, and I've got a whole video on that, so please check that out. But you've got to think, if you're moving into a new market, well, all the pros, there might be a huge opportunity for sales, for revenues here, but you need to weigh that up against the costs of moving to that new market. And it's likely that it will be in your favour that the pros, the revenue is going to be much more than the costs if you've got fantastic e-commerce, because e-commerce has allowed the progression of globalization, moving businesses into new territories to eventually become MNCs, multinational companies. And also, you could consider the exchange rates might also be important in this, depending on which way the exchange rate is. But I guess why I'm showing this is that if you move to a new international market, you're opening up other areas of the specification that you can talk about. Maybe there's actually a beast question out of this. And just to remind you of the last few, so we said earlier on, you could do rebranding, repackaging. Seen that in Irn-Bru. Also, as we've seen a lot in technologies, computer games, computer consoles, joysticks, gaming pads, phones, tablets, they're always doing new features or new functionality, it's called in the tech world. So you think about the iPhone, you've got the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7, the 8, the X, it just keeps on going. Each has a different bit that they can do, a different feature, a different functionality, and that allows them to remain, them being Apple, to remain in the maturity stage and keep those sales going. And that's probably why Apple is the first $1 trillion company by market capitalization, the biggest company in the world right now, 2018. And the final thing that I've said already is that with extension strategies, do not be afraid to say you can use extension strategies in combination to one another. Because often, if you do them in combination, they're going to be even more powerful, they're going to be even more effective than if you just choose one. So depending on the question and the way it's worded, just keep that in your mind. If you can go for combinations, I just think it's a stronger answer. So you can use combinations, because if you use combinations, increase effectiveness. Use the case study where relevant for that. I'll go through an example. So if you are just an old product that's been knocking around for ages, you're in the maturity stage, you're scared of going into the decline stage, you want to increase your sales, so you choose an extension strategy. Well, you might want to think about new segments that you could target to get sales from different customer segments. You might have to do advertising in order to let those people in other segments know that you're open for business for them. And maybe you've changed your rebranding or repackaging, or you've put new features in that would suit that new segment. So you can think like that. Alternatively, this whole area here, if you're moving to a new international market, well, if you move into a new international market, so the M in spam, well, again, you're going to have to do lots of advertising to make people aware in the new market you're in that you exist. Awareness is so important. You might have to adjust your prices accordingly to that area, that new international market. That could be higher, it could be lower. It depends on the business, and it depends on the market you're entering. And also, you might need to think about segmentation in that market. What is the average income in that area? Because if the average income in the new international market you have moved into is higher, it's likely you can increase your prices as a result. The key thing is, when you are arguing for your extension strategies, is that you want your sales and your revenues to be exceeding the costs of doing whatever it is the extension strategy is. So you need to bear that in mind. The information may well be given to you in the case study, but if it's not, be savvy and consider it. Some things are going to be really expensive to do. For example, moving into a new market is likely to cost a lot, but it could be outweighed by the fact that it's a new market. Maybe it's China, maybe it's India, maybe it's Brazil, maybe it's Russia. I mean, all these countries could possibly have an enormous amount of sales, that can be converted into revenue, and it's going to outweigh those cons and become profit. And that's when it's a smashing answer. Good luck with your exams. I hope you enjoyed that on extension strategies.